So the way we usually get started is a little round robin where everyone can introduce themselves. And if you want to share anything about your phenology programs or just anything you're working on related to phenology or why you're here or anything like that, that would be great. So I'm Erin Postumus. I'm the outreach coordinator for the USA National Phenology Network, and I met a couple of you before. And the reason we do these calls is to offer a chance for all of our local phenology leaders to have a place to connect with each other each month. We usually have a topic where we go over something. I'll share some sort of a resource with you this month. This is an idea from one of our participants a couple months ago to go in depth on a particular species and kind of show you all the information we have on the website for that species, and then go into the visualization tool and start to explore some of the stuff that you can see about the phenology data for that species. So that's what we'll talk about today, but it's also totally open if anyone has any other questions or stuff they want to talk about. I also invite future call topics if you have anything that you'd like to go over on a future call. So does anyone want to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm Kim Quillen. I'm at Salisbury University in Maryland, and we're excited. We're in our first semester participating in the National Phenology Network, collecting data in our intro biology course. So students, each student follows an individual tree on campus for the semester. And so they've been collecting data all semester, and now we are working with the data in different ways to try to see what they can do with their own data, and then using the tool to look at national data to, see the larger trends and things like that. So I'm really excited to see, what I haven't seen yet, and to know that I'm using the tools, like the full power of what's there. And we've had a few little challenges here and there, and I don't know if they're common and if there are certain ways of overcoming those and that kind of thing too. So, but it's been great. And I want to just commend you for the volume of resources at your site and how powerful it is and what we can do with it. It's been really great. So.
Oh, thank you. And it's nice to finally see you. We've emailed a few times, so thanks for coming. Yeah, and we can definitely get into some of those issues too anytime during the call if you want to bring them up. So yeah, thanks. All right, anyone want to go next?
I can go. Can you hear me? So I'm Nan Hubner, and I've been volunteering with the National Park Service for, 4 or 5 years now, collecting phenology data. And first at Great Smoky, and now I'm working to help organize volunteers that work along the Blue Ridge Parkway to set up some phenology sites and to collect data. So it's like I second what you said about what a great set of tools, and this will be really helpful for me just learning how to use, all the wonderful resources that you guys have.
Great, thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so my name is Emma Stell. I'm a PhD student actually at the University of Delaware. My advisor is Rodrigo Vargas. I don't know if any of you guys know him, but I am working on phenology at our local field site in Dover, Delaware. So I am excited to learn some new tools and, just listen to the conversation.
Welcome. And then Elizabeth?
Hey, good afternoon. At least it's afternoon. I'm on the East Coast. And it's definitely a Friday. My name is Elizabeth Vinnie. I work for Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation in the Forest Health Program. And I went to the LPL training this past spring, and in anticipation of a grant that we knew was going to come through and was finally signed and received this September. So we're just getting our gears started for bringing the project on board. The LPP will be just one part of sort of 4 main parts of this large multi-year grant. But we're very excited to start. Our focus will be on collecting phenology data at different latitudes and elevation, specifically for invasive terrestrial plants, to help with the timing, the best timing for treatment and management. And not too much to report on at the moment, as we're mostly focused on standing up sub-grantee awards and agreements and all of that sort of fun bureaucratic stuff, but hope to dig into setting up all of the fun phenology stuff this winter. We have been carrying ourselves along with the energy of all things phenology by starting to develop some of our outreach materials in the form of a podcast, which is on the vtinvasives.org website, which talks about invasive plants, but through a phenology lens. So it's kind of fun to introduce the concepts of phenology. But that's kind of where we are at the moment.
That's awesome. Congrats on getting your funding finally. And if you want to share that link to your podcast, I'd be happy to share in the partner newsletter. I think people would love to see it or hear it. If you want it, you could drop it in the chat or email it to me. Either one. Cool. All right. So I think we'll get started with the looking at the species and the viz tool, and then we can get into some other questions and stuff at the end. So I'm going to share my screen. So I thought I'd first kind of talk about some of the resources we have just around learning about different plants before we get into the viz tool, because I think if you were thinking about observing a particular species, or if you were even at the point where you're like compiling an annual report and you want to figure out what aspects to visualize, I think it's good to just think first about, you know, all the stuff about the natural history of the plant and how you might want to use the visualization tool to maybe explore different questions that you might have to answer. And through your local phenology programs, you might already have questions in mind that you're trying to answer. We really encourage that because it helps you to really design your phenology program and figure out, you know, how many sites you're going to have and plants and all that. But I just wanted to touch on the resources we have on the website. So I would start with on the observe menu here on the Nature's Notebook website, we have the plants and animals page. And I'm going to look at Forsythia today because I think that's a nice one to look at. Hopefully it's in a lot of the places that you guys represent. So you can type in, you know, the name into the search box here. There's other ways to filter and search on this page. But each of the species we have on the Nature's Notebook list has we call a species profile page. And the profiles have all of the questions that are on the data sheets, and then also some other information as well. Sometimes it can take a little bit to load on this page, so we'll give it a minute. So it's kind of a nice place to start out. Even before you select species, you can check out this page to learn a little bit more about what kinds of questions are involved in the data sheets for these different species. We have been having a little bit of an issue lately with the website speed. There's been a lot of requests on the data download tool and on the visualization tool lately. And so it's bogging things down a little bit. So we are working on fixing that. So if you see things loading slowly, you can let me know about it if you see that, but we are aware that that's an issue and we're trying to fix the underlying problem. So this species profile page will have so usually some identifying information here at the top. It's not for all of the species, but most of them have this, as well as if it has some special considerations for observing, some things to think about that might be the cause of the phenology that you're seeing. Like this says, if you know, the drought might cause this plant to have premature leaf color or leaf fall, so you can make a comment about that. Then it goes into the different phenophases that we have on the data sheet, as well as the phenophase definition. And hopefully you all know about these. It's a pretty explicit kind of reasoning behind this question and all the things that you need to know about the plant to answer that question, as well as the intensity categories. And then there's a little bit more information at the bottom. You can always go and look at these different resources about the plant too. Sometimes there's photographs and things like that here. Some of the species also have a Phenophase photo guide. And so if we go back to the plants and animals page, we don't have one for Forsythia. So if anyone wants to make one, that would be awesome if that's the species you're interested in. But we do have a list of all the species that have Phenophase photo guides in this little link here. And what these are PDFs where each of the Phenophase questions on the second page gets a picture. And so we've vetted these, we've like made sure that they're zoomed in and really clear and they show the correct Phenophase. So this is another good additional resource to kind of be able to share with people. And then the first page has just some general information. This is where you can put some of those like considerations for observing. This is a good place to put information like if the plant has both male and female plants, you might want to add that so people know that that's something to look for. Or we were just talking yesterday in the other call about how some species will take many years before they'll actually flower. This would be a good place to put that as well, so people can kind of remember that, you know, the tree might have to be a certain age before you'll even see flowers on it. So that's another resource that's on this. And then because we don't have these guides for all of the species, I also wanted to point out that we have a photo resource on our Smug Mug page. And the place to get to that is under the 4 groups, which is kind of the hub for local phenology programs. Under this phenology program resources page, if you scroll down, you'll see this under the train and engage volunteers, Phenophase photo guide page. And so this has, if you want to make a guide, if you have a bunch of nice pictures or if you have a need for a particular guide and we don't have it, then you can go to here to get the templates for the different types of trees and shrubs and other plants that we have. And that'll give you a PowerPoint where you can plug in those different photos and then the information. And then if you want it to be posted on our website, you can send it to me and we'll actually vet it for you. So we'll make sure that it's correct and then we'll approve it if it has good photographs and then post it on the website on that table. But for ones that don't have guides yet, I would point you to on the right side here, we have the Smug Mug page. And this is we have a Phenophase gallery, which is a nice place to go to if you're not sure about, you know, for a species you're interested in, what do those Phenophases look like? This can be a good place to start. So there are folders for each species that we have photographs for. And we have a way for you to submit photos too. So you can feel free to email me about that, or there's information on that photo guide page about how to email us. But we can go down here and there's one for Forsythia. And so we can get a little bit better idea of what the different Phenophases look like here. And also another thing that's good to keep in mind is the order of the Phenophases. So for this species, the initial growth or the breaking leaf buds can kind of happen at the same time as the flowers. So it's just good to be aware of that, and it's something that you can share with your volunteers so they're aware of what things happen first. But you'll see a lot of times the flowers are out, but there are sometimes the little leaf buds on there as well that have already formed. Like here you have an open flower, and then you have some leaf buds that actually have already broken. So they're at the increasing leaf size stage. So any questions about that? I know there's a lot of things on the website, but you can always, I found that sometimes Google search is a great way to find stuff on our website, even more so than our search box. So if you ever can't find something, I recommend putting in NPN or Nature's Notebook and then what you're looking for. And I've actually found that really useful for finding things on our website if you can't remember like which page to go through to get to it. So once you have kind of an understanding of, okay, I'm going to try to visualize some data for Forsythia, and I know that I'm interested in maybe like the breaking leaf buds and the open flowers and the timing of those things, then we can go into the Viz tool and start to look at that. So there's a couple ways to get to the Viz tool. From the Nature's Notebook website, you can go to the more ways to connect and then the visualization tool. There is a webinar that's recorded on this page here. So if you want another like kind of overview of all the functionality of the tool, that's a good place to start. But you click this link to get into the tool. And then we have on the seasonal stories, which are on the landing page here, these are meant to be tutorials of to show you how to use the tool. So I invite you to explore those. There's one for each of the different types of visualizations we have. So it really goes through, you know, how to use each of these, what you can learn from them, and then how you can change them to see different things on the tool. But if you have in mind the species you want to visualize, I would just go right to the Data Explorer here on the left side in the menu. So then once you get to the Data Explorer, there's first you have to choose which type of visualization you want. You can start with the map to just kind of get an idea of where the observations are coming in from. So pick a map. You don't have to pick a base layer to add to the map. These are the way you get into looking at things like the spring index or our forecasts for different pests. Also our accumulated growing degree day maps. But if you're just looking at species phenology, just leave that off. So have none selected. And then you can put a boundary if you want, you know, to limit the geographic area that displays. But usually if I'm just trying to see where people are reporting the species, I don't put a boundary on. And then you'll have to decide on a year. If you want to see, you know, what's been reported so far this year, definitely just put this year, but you can also look at previous years. And then you'll have to put the species in. And then decide on a phenophase. And you'll be able to put up to 3 different phenophases, species phenophase combinations on the map at one time. And it's going to take a minute to load those. Okay. So I'm going to put on initial shoot or leaf growth, which is the same thing as breaking leaf buds. If anyone's wondering why it says phenophase class instead of phenophase, this is because we have the ability now to look at different taxonomic levels on some of the visualizations, where instead of looking at species, you could look at genus or family. So we wanted to make this something that you can see across different functional types of plants. So for some plants, they're called breaking leaf buds. For things like grasses, it's called initial growth. So we made up names that like encompass everything across all the functional types. So you could compare in one visualization all of those things together. So I'm also going to put on open flowers on here. And then we'll get a plot of these phenophases. So one thing to keep in mind is this is not showing us all of the observations for Forsythia. It's showing us the onset. So there's one little dot, a square or a triangle on the map for when an observation location reported the first yes for either initial growth or open flowers. And so the initial growth is a triangle and then the open flowers is the square. If there's a little green outline, they reported both of those phenophases. So if you click on it, you can get some more information. You can see the name of the site, you can see the lat long, you can see the 2 different phenophases, and then the day that they were reported. So another thing to keep in mind is this is showing us all the onsets, but it's also restricting to only show the onsets where there's a prior no. So we always emphasize that those negative observations where you're saying, no, I didn't see anything, are really important because they help you to have a more precise onset estimate. So if we were to have all of the observations, we don't really know if that was just the first time someone went out that year, or if it was actually they were going out every week or every couple weeks and they said no, but then they said yes. So you know that's within a week or 2 or a month time. And so it defaults to showing a no, it has a little information here, a no, prior no within 30 days, but you can actually restrict this even more if you want it to be even more precise and go down to 7 days or 14 days. So now we're only seeing the onsets where there is a prior no within a week. So we know that these are accurate within a week. They actually started happening within a week's time. Any questions about that?
I actually have a question. This might not be the right place to ask it, but when I was using the graphing tool and it would show me data for the whole country or something like that. I was trying to figure out a way to find the N of how many, if I used like percent yes, or a proportion yes. I wasn't sure, is it 1,000 records or 10 records? And I was wondering if this tool would be a way for me to see that, or if this would not be a good avenue towards that, or if there's a way of determining the N.
Yeah. So the one visualization that shows that is the activity curves, and that is the one that has the proportion of yes. So I'll show that one in a minute, and I'll show you where you can see the N.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. The other ones don't have it. Yeah, I'll go through kind of why, or how you can see like generally, how many stations or plants are represented.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah, good question though. Yeah, any other questions about this? The other component of this is the color of the icon. So they correspond to the date of the onset. So you can see, which ones are kind of generally earlier or later. And the way they're represented here kind of makes sense. The southern observations are on the earlier side, and then the ones in the north are a little bit lighter. So they're a little bit later in the year. Okay, so then I'm going to do the calendar next, because I feel like the calendar, if you're kind of going in the order of like kind of broad information to more detail, I think the calendar is a nice way to get a picture of the presence or absence of the phenophases. So I'm going to go to, I'm going to look at just this year again, and I'm going to do the same 2 phenophases. I'm gonna make it yellow. And this is where you can change the taxonomic level that you're looking at. So if you wanted to group this, and look at like more plants within the same genus, or I guess that doesn't apply for forsythia, but maybe you're looking at like all maples or all oaks or something, that would be the way you do that here. But I'm gonna do this one. Okay, so it's going to load up the observations. And what we're going to see on the calendar are the lines that represent the date that someone went out to make an observation. Colored lines represent when someone went out and they said a yes. And that could be anyone. So we could be looking at, there might be a day where, 5 people went out and looked at different plants. If 4 of them said no and 1 person said yes, it'll show up as a green line to say there was a yes somewhere. So this isn't a great way to get an idea of like the magnitude of how many people said yes, but it's a good way to get an idea of whether there were any yes reports across the region that you're looking at here. And this one doesn't really give you an idea of the number of people, because it could be any number of observers or plants on any particular day. The little 99 there is just the day of the year that we're looking at. But it is an idea or a way to get an idea of the timing of when things are happening. So we can see that there's quite a bit of overlap in when these things are happening. There are a couple more observations earlier for open flowers. If we want to get a better idea, I would probably narrow down the geographic area, because there might be a lot of, like we saw on the map, there's like earlier flowers, there's later flowers. So it might be good to restrict this, and you can do that in this boundary layer, either by doing a predefined boundary. So you could decide, I want to look at a particular state, or you could like click on a couple states, or you can use this polygon tool. We have the hand-drawn boundary, and actually like put a boundary around like an area like the Northeast or something. And then once you do that, it'll automatically update the calendar that you're looking at, and it'll restrict it. So for the Northeast, it's looking like more people are reporting the breaking leaf buds right before, or a couple weeks before flowers in general across the region. And you can narrow it down even further. That's why the map is nice. You could kind of like, if you saw there a bunch of observations around part of the Northeast, you could put the box around that area. And then other things we can do on this are we can turn on the negative data. So we can see that even though with this one, it's kind of interesting. There's this like second flowering period here, which you might wonder like, oh, is this just because it was actually flowering all year, but no one was going out in the summer? But there were people going out and they were saying no. So it looks like there were kind of two periods or a second period of flowering for some of these plants. We still don't have an idea from this calendar about like, what's the magnitude? Like, are there more reports here? And then these are just a couple, because we can't get that information about how many observers or how many plants within the calendar. And if you wanted to download this to use, you can play around with the size of the labels to make it easier to read. You can move the labels, you can make the bands different sizes with these tools here. And then you can also download the calendar here as a PNG. Any questions about the calendar?
I think you kind of just answered one of my like kind of overall questions I have about the visualization tool, about exporting data. So is most of it in like PNG type data, or I mean, I was just curious.
Yeah, so the Viz tool is meant to be a way to just kind of see like how much data is available for different species or the general patterns. But yeah, if you wanted to export it, you would probably want to use the Phenology Observation Portal. Have you seen that at all? So that's another tool we have that's basically a way to create a filtered Excel file that has the data in like a raw form. So you can actually, if you go to this export data link on the left on this panel, that will take you into the POP, the Phenology Observation Portal, with your filters already preset. So it'll give you like, it'll tell you here actually, if you go to the little eyeball, like what you've selected. And I have on here, I was looking at 2021 and I was looking at Forsythia. So if you wanted to say like, oh, actually, I want more species, you can do that after you get in here, or you can go directly in here from the website and then start from the beginning without any filters. But then, yeah, if you want to know more about these all are different data types, but they have descriptions here. They're like summarized in different forms. So you're welcome to check out that page to get more information about the data types.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. So then let's look at the activity curve. I feel like this provides the richest information, especially if you're wondering about the timing of phenophases and you want to know like when are the majority of people reporting these different phenophases. So this has similar controls where, well, we can come back if we want, or we could do it now, I guess, add a boundary just so we're kind of restricting what we're looking at. I'm going to do the Northeast again. And then we have to put the same kind of things on with the year and the species. This part is the metric that we're going to display. So this is, I feel like if you're looking at a very small area, or you know that there's like a particular group that's been observing, there's a way to get into this tool from your local phenology program link. I can go over that after we're done, where if you have a program set up, your data is tagged with that program. And so you can get into the visualization tool with a filter already set. So you're only looking at your data. And if you know that they're collected consistently, then the total yes records works because you know that there's going to be the same amount of data coming in each week or each month. But for looking at a larger area, you don't really know if the observer effort has been consistent because it might have been that, you know, a bunch of people took a vacation over the summer. So the total yes records will fluctuate a bit with that number of people. So I usually change this to proportion, and this will kind of correct for that and will show us the proportion of the people that said yes out of everyone that observed. So it will kind of correct that observer effort. You can also look at the individual plants instead of just the yes records. So this was the proportion of individuals and then the total individuals. But I usually just do the proportion of yes records. And then I'm going to add on the open flowers. Make this proportion as well. And then we will get a graph. So what we're looking at here is the proportion of yes records summarized by month. So for each month, it's going to give us a single data point. And this is going to show us the proportion of people that said yes versus no. If we hover over, then you can see in the legend at the top, that's where we can get that N information. So this is showing us the N is the number of plants that's involved in this summary for the month. And we can reduce that down if we want to look at more fine scale. We can take it down to biweekly or weekly, and that'll just show more of the actual variation that was happening in the different weeks. So now it's summarized by each week. There's a data point if there were observations. And so if we look at when the kind of peak was happening here, that's when the highest proportion of people were saying yes for open flowers. And so that, if you go up to the top, there were 24 plants involved in this. 92% of them were people saying yes to open flowers. And then if we look at the peak for the initial growth, that is 19 plants, and it was 84% were yes. So I like the activity curves because, you know, the calendar, it kind of masks the amount of reports that were happening. And this shows us that, yeah, there were some people saying yes in the fall, but it wasn't nearly as much as in the springtime. So we had, you know, 18 or 24 people, 92% of them were saying yes, but in the fall, it's more like 7, 6, I guess 12 here, and a third of them. So it's a lot lower of the percentage of yes records. So, and then there's a couple little bumps here with the initial growth too. For these kind of deciduous plants, we really recommend just reporting the breaking leaf buds Phenophase if it's at that first initial growth stage. Some people, you know, they'll see the little buds that may still grow throughout the year on the ends of the branches. We don't really consider those to be the breaking leaf buds Phenophase, even though it does look like a little bud that's emerging into leaves. So I think try to encourage your observers to only report breaking leaf buds at the very beginning of the year, that first flush of leaves. And then these little ones, you would consider those to be that Phenophase. What else here? So you can play around with the way that the curves are and stuff like that, but I think I like this one the best. But any questions about this one? So the last type of visualization that we have for looking at the phenology data is the scatter plot. And this one is where if you have a question that you're trying to answer about your plant, often it'll be something like, is my plant being impacted by climate changes? You know, will like warming temperatures cause my plant to have different phenology? And this is a way to start to get at those patterns. It might not give you all the answers, but it's a way to start plotting and like visualizing that kind of information. So I'm going to put this on again because I like my northeast little area. So the scatter plot can show you up to 10 years of data at a time. But one thing to keep in mind, if you want to compare your phenology data to climate variables, the climate data is actually lagged by a year. So we get our climate data from DayMet, and they actually don't publish the climate data and summarize it until after the end of the year. So, and it's actually lagged then by another usually 6 months. So we just got the 2020 data in June this year and imported it. So we won't have the 2021 data until probably June of next year. So you would want to put your limit years as probably up to 2020. You could restrict it if you didn't want to look at 10 years, but I'm going to use these two as the bounds. And I'm just going to put one Phenophase on here for now. You can do more than one, but could always change it later. So I'm going to look at the initial growth. And then once I pick out my the onset Phenophase that I want to look at, what you're going to see here is a bunch of the dots on the visualization, and each of these represents the onset of a single plant. Actually, I should say that in a different way. So this actually, the default shows you the onset for the site. So if you had 3 forsythia plants, it's going to give you the average. This is called our summarized phenometrics. If we want to see individual plants, this is actually a way to do that. You use the individual phenometrics, and that will separate out those summarized site level estimates into the separate individual plants. So you can see all of them, or if you just want to look at the site summarized, where really it's a better picture of like, it takes out some of the variation between individual plants, and it shows you like for the site that someone selected, the average onset of initial growth is this date. And so each of these is a year. You can hover over to see. This one was an observation where they said initial growth happened on April 12th in 2019, and they'll all be different years. Maybe there might be some years, same years, but each point is an individual onset from an individual year for a site. And then if we turn this on, it represents an individual plant. So what we can do with this tool is you compare the onset dates to an abiotic variable of some kind. The default is latitude. So this would tell us information about whether there's a relationship between the onset and latitude for initial growth in forsythia. We have a fit line option, which kind of starts to give you an idea of whether there's a good relationship or not. And we have the R² value here in the legend. So it's not a perfect way to tell you like, yes, there's a trend happening here, there's a pattern, but you can kind of start to see if there's a relationship here. And another thing you can do is if you want to throw out some of the maybe anomalous or error observations that might have been made in error, like these later, oh, I'm sorry, not this is later on the northern or the higher part of this graph. Maybe someone said breaking leaf buds later in the year, but you don't really want to consider those because you only want to consider that first flush of leaves. You can restrict what you're looking at here by this slider bar. So if you want to say, I'm only looking at the first flush of leaves in forsythia, so I'm going to take this down and I'm only going to consider maybe like the first half of the year, then you can do that. And that might improve the relationship too, because you're throwing out some of those later observations that aren't really the question that you're asking. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? You can also change the precision filter again. So if you wanted to look at only the onsets where someone's going out every week and they said no the week before, so you know that it actually happened within a week's time, then you can add that on there. It might really reduce, it really reduces. And actually look at the R² is not good anymore. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I guess there are just a lot fewer observations and not as many data points to consider. You can also totally turn the precision filter off, which means you're looking at any observations regardless of whether there was a no prior. And so if you want to try out different variables, that's the x-axis here. So we have things like elevation. Year will show you if there's any sort of difference between years in the record we're looking at. So this will separate out these points by the year they were observed. And this is a way to see if there's like a gradual shifting to earlier over the decade, where you're seeing, sorry, you're seeing earlier and earlier observations over time. This doesn't really show that there's any sort of pattern. There's a lot of variation, it looks like, from year to year. And then we have a whole bunch of climate variables here. So you can do precipitation that's summarized by month. And then you can also do, we have Tmax and Tmin for each season. And then we have day length and accumulated precipitation since January 1st. And then the accumulated growing degree days, which is, does anyone know what that is already? It's used a lot in like agriculture and pest control, but it's basically a way to measure the amount of heat that's accumulated since the beginning of the year. So we use this is a January 1st start date with a base temperature of 32 degrees. Usually it's either 32 degrees or 50 degrees are the most common ones. 32 is like freezing, so that's a limitation for a lot of plants where they might start growing above that amount of degrees. And then for 50 degrees, it's used with insects often because they won't really have a lot of activity below 50 degrees. And so basically, like each day where you're above the base temperature, you add up all those degrees across the year. So it's a kind of a way to see like the amount of heat exposure that a plant might have had since the beginning of the year. So yeah, you can play around with those. With the seasonal variables, it's always going to be the prior season or that the season of that year. So if we're looking at forsythia here, and it's something that's happening, you know, in the springtime, if we're looking at summer temperature, it's going to be telling us what was the summer temp the year before, and then the fall the year before, and probably the current spring. And then the winter would be, that's January, February, March. So that would be the current year here. And we explain all that on the BizTool landing page. If you scroll down here, that tells you like all of these explanations of how those are calculated. So if we wanted to see if like the maximum spring temperature had anything to do with the timing of initial growth, this is a pretty good fit. This is showing that as in locations where it was warmer, the initial growth was earlier for those plants. So that is about what we'd expect. It's a pretty good fit. The points are pretty close to the line. So it's a R-squared of 0.4, which is pretty good. So any questions about this?
Just really quick, what was the AGDD? What did it stand for again?
It's accumulated growing degree days.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there's lots of definitions of it. You can see like how it's calculated and stuff. But we use a January 1st start date with 32-degree base temperature. Yeah, and if you want to learn more about AGDVs on the seasonal stories here, does anyone want to volunteer their zip code? We could put it in.
05462.
So we can put in the zip code. And then, so this is what the tutorial things kind of look like. They each have a, what am I looking at? What does this tell me? How can I modify this? So each of them kind of have that to help you figure out how to use the tool. So this is a graph of accumulated growing degree days. So you can see it starts, this is the beginning of the year on January 1st, and then it's accumulated. So it's always going to be increasing. You're adding more and more each day that you have above the 32-degree base temperature. And this gives you a comparison of a bunch of different things. So it's the black line is the 30-year average, and we're actually looking at 1981 to 2010. In a few weeks, we're going to switch to the next set of decades because it just turned over. So now we're going to have 1991 to 2020 because that's the most recent three. So that it'll change soon. But for now, we're looking at kind of pre a lot of the early, really warm years. So it's kind of like almost like pre-climate, a lot of the major climate change. So it's kind of a nice baseline to look at. But the 2021 is represented in blue. So we can get an idea of like how much more heat was accumulated at the zip code compared to the baseline of the average. And then we can also see the yellow line is last year. So you can see that this year, your zip code in Vermont was like pretty warm. And you could see the number of days too. It was early. So it was like as of this date, what is this, May 15th, you were like 7 days ahead of schedule in terms of the comparison to the average. And then it has maintained and grown actually a lot. Now you're a lot of growing degree days. I don't know why it's not telling me the days. Maybe it's like too much. It can't do it. Because that's already, even the 2020 comparison 70 days earlier.
That's
That seems
crazy.
kind of crazy. Yeah.
This is up in the mountains too. This isn't like in the valley.
Yeah, so a lot warmer. And you can also change the, I think, what can you change? Oh, here, sorry. You can change the base temperature to 50. If you're looking at more insect activity, you can change that there. So yeah. So
which
that is, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask, where I looked away the second that you were you clicked on whatever it was to get to where you entered the zip code.
Oh yeah. So it's from the landing page. So when you first get into the viz tool, this is what you see. And it's just this first, we call them seasonal story. So you just enter the zip code right there.
Awesome, thank you.
So any other questions? It doesn't have to be about this stuff, but other things you wanted to talk about?
Actually, I do have, I mean, I don't know if any of you guys would know anything about this, but something interesting that we've been seeing. So this is a wetland site we're working at. So we only have from 2016 to now as far as phenology data. However, dormancy season has been increasing, and which goes against like what we were thinking completely. It's dominated by C4 grasses, specifically Spartina alterniflora. I just didn't know if you guys have seen anything else as far as winter trends that kind of defy what we think we should see.
Did you say winter dormancy has extended?
Yeah, the
Okay.
season dormancy.
Yeah. So I've read that there's like winter chilling that's required for a lot of plants where they have to have a certain number of degrees of, it's not always like very cold temps, it's kind of like intermediate where it's like between, I've seen like 28 and 32 or something. So it's like starting to warm up, and some plants need to be exposed to a certain number of those days. And if they aren't, then I think there's this thing in the plant's evolution where it doesn't want to be brought out of dormancy too early. So if it hasn't undergone those colder temperatures, I've seen that bud burst can be delayed actually. And so that would create a longer winter dormancy because the plant's still waiting to get to those cold temperatures to kind of tell it like, okay, you've gone through the cold part. Now it's time for the warming. It's like, it'll keep waiting. And then when it gets really warm, it kind of does kick it in. It forces it into that, but it's usually delayed then. So that's a little bit counterintuitive.
Very interesting because just looking at the long-term climate trends in Delaware. So yes, there is a continual trend of warming, but as far as the months of like March and April, they don't really match that exact warming trend. They're staying way more, I mean, yes, they're still warming, but they're staying kind of cooler and more steady as far as across the climatological record. So I'm wondering if there's something to do, boys, no, sorry, I have my own dog problems. So I'm wondering if there's something to do with like the warming temperatures during the rest of the year versus the more steady, colder temperature. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just wondering if you had any insight, but that's actually very interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact articles, but I'm sure if you search for that, it's like lack of winter chilling leads to delayed bud burst. It's probably something like that will get you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I have a question. If you wanted to graph the, the quantifying of Phenophase, the percent and so on, what strategy would you recommend? We've downloaded the raw data and taken that approach, but based on the tools, is there an efficient way to approach those data?
Can you say more about you said the quantity or the
like
percentage?
if students, for example, we were looking at proportion of yes records, and that's great because like, yes, we've hit that phenophase, it's occurring. But students have been, the percent change in leaf color, for example. Is there a mechanism for that?
Oh, we really want to do that. Yeah. So we don't have any way right now to visualize that. So you're talking about the intensity data, which is like,
yes, thank you.
So beyond the yes or no question is kind of like the presence absence of the phenophase. Right. We also have the percent, and it's like percent of the canopy full of leaves or the number of breaking leaf buds, and those are in bins of numbers. Yeah, we don't have anything yet. We're gonna have a meeting in 2 weeks about like how to start determining the peak in those kind of percentages and stuff like that. So we're working towards it, but the way that I've done it before in Excel, you can, kind of like group those things, and because it's categories, so it's kind of
Right.
hard because it's a
We
range.
use the bottom at, if it's 5 to
Yeah.
25, we use 5 as a conservative estimate, just to try to
Okay.
see if we could see the shapes of the trends. And that was a good start. Like the
Yeah.
students were able to do that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you
Um,
could do that. And then I've also done like made them into categories. So like for percent open flowers, I'll say like the bottom category is a 1, and then the 95% or more is a 6. And so
Got it.
it'll show you on the graph. It's a little bit simpler maybe to graph it that way in Excel, but you can see, when it goes up to the highest category.
I
But
like
yeah,
that approach. Yeah, we can do that too.
yeah, we definitely want to incorporate that into the Viz tool at some point.
I have a couple other techno type questions. I don't know if now's a good time, or if
Sure.
anyone else has any general graphing questions or data questions. So we're using the app for students to collect data, and then we're going into the website to, pull down all these visualization tools. And a number of students have said they've lost their data this week. And I was wondering if some kind of update had occurred, or if sometimes, like, does it happen that it just is not loading, and if we wait, I don't know if you'd run into that before, or if it's like something I should be concerned about, or it'll come back.
Yeah, so a couple things. The data that you submit won't show up in the Viz tool until the next day, because there's a nightly process that runs to like link everything together and like make the visualizations possible. So there's that lag to keep in mind. Sometimes the observations will get stuck on the phone, and I don't know if that's an issue with not having a sufficient connection, or if it's something with on our end where it's like it's getting overloaded with so many requests to like push data into the database that it's pushing back. But I would definitely have them check that review page on the app, because that will show you like what's been sent in and what hasn't. And so there's a little green bar that says user data are up to date, and if it doesn't show that, it says like, I don't remember exactly what it says, but it's a yellow bar and it says like they're not all in there. Then hit that sync button again and make sure they do it when they're on a good Wi-Fi connection. And that should force the observations in. So it could be that they're on the phone, and they're just stuck there.
Yes, we have had that. And then eventually, if I'm like, just maybe like, let's try it again, maybe it needs a better connection. But we have a couple students who the data on their app is missing, is gone.
Oh.
And I thought, well, don't worry about it, because
Yeah.
as long as it's synced at some point, it should exist in cyberspace. But it's gone from their personal records. And I wasn't sure if there had happened to be an update, or, oh, that'll come back, it's just bogged down or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. So yeah, that is something that I would think, yeah, if the data are not showing up on the review screen, then they're probably not even on the phone. So they would have to re-enter those. So I think when they do their observations, definitely have them like submit it and then check that, that review page where you can see like there's a little square that appears that says like this is when you submitted data. And if you tap that, then you get a summary of what you've submitted. Maybe they should start doing that when they're like doing the observations, just to make sure like, okay, it's in there.
Well, it's actually that's my question though, is because it has been in there and they've graphed it, everything's been great, and they've seen it all semester. And now when they go in, there's nothing, there's no little squares, and the data is just, it's all just been like wiped clean. There's no data for them. And so, and I know the students and I've seen their data, and it's not a problem. Like we're fine, like we know, but they are just feeling panicky about it. And so I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe there's an explanation.
That is strange. I would definitely, I'll look into that. If you want to send me an email with the usernames of which students, we can have them.
Okay.
I mean, the data should be somewhere if that's the case. If they've seen them, especially if they've seen them in the Viz tool, they've made it into the database. And we do have like backups of previous months. So we could always like, if they did somehow get deleted or something, I don't know how that would have happened, but it's probably just that they're not on the phone anymore. And that's another thing we would want to look into, because I don't know why that would be the case. Have they tried downloading the data from the website and they're also not there anymore? Or is
Well,
it just
I've
on
had
the phone?
both. I've had a
Okay.
couple students who are like, oh yeah, my data's there. And I'm like, okay, you're fine. I don't care if it's on your phone or not.
Yeah.
And then I had one, not my student, but someone else's students that they went to the web version and they didn't see any data there either. So I
Okay.
can look more into it. I just thought I'd check with you in case there's just like, oh yeah, every time we do an update, this has happened or something like that.
No, that shouldn't
Okay.
happen. Yeah, so we can have them submit a bug report on the phone, and that will send like a kind of like the everything that's happened on their app, a report of that to our IT director, and he can look into it and see like what happened, and
Okay,
we can
thank
find.
you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a couple other tech things that I think I can just email you about. Like, I
Okay.
don't think everyone, it might be so specific that it might
Yeah.
not be that others, need to hear it. So I can just reach out to you.
Okay. Is there anything that people would like to cover on future calls? Any ideas for monthly topics?
I've seen
I've
your,
been going up.
oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that I've been going through the previous ones that you recorded, so that's been really, really helpful.
Oh, good.
And
Okay.
and after I go through all those, and if I have any other questions, I'll have something for next month.
Cool. Sounds good.
To say thank you. I'm really glad my advisor, messaged me about this and be like, you should go join, because this has been really awesome. So thank you very much.
I'm glad you could make it. Hope you can join us again. Another call. Did you have another idea, Kim, for a future call?
Well, like they were saying, the resources you have are so great, and I really appreciate the backlog, because it's very helpful. Like, oh, you want to go find out how to do this, and you walk through it. I've really enjoyed hearing how these data are being used and all the papers you've posted. And so, I mean, that's a regular thing, I guess, you revisit, but that I would enjoy seeing some samples of that again, about new data, and how I could present to the students, you've contributed to this, and here's how it's important, here's what other people are doing with the data you're collecting, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we did have our director, Teresa Crimmins, actually did a like how your data are being used webinar in the spring this year. So it was really popular. So we're going to do another one probably early next year, where it's kind of like an overview. It'll be updated with the papers from this year. And
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful for people to see that the data aren't just going into some database. Like, people are downloading them and using them. Hopefully Emma will use them.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I found that paper. I don't know what link it was in. It was, I think, in something you sent out a month ago. It had the link to that paper Alyssa was a co-author on, about, and I guess maybe it might be out there, like where we can find more journal articles about, phenology and Nature's Notebook. And
yeah. So yeah, that one I think you're talking about was it was like looking into how phenology has been used in the National Park Service. Yeah. So we post, let me find the link. There's a publication summary page.
Oh,
where,
wonderful.
Yeah, we have, it's like all of the ones we've highlighted in the newsletters over the years. So I don't know if that one, it was an official like pub summary for that one. So I would point you to this page, is the papers that we've summarized. Not all of them are Nature's Notebook data specific, but some of them are, a lot of them are, and some of them are just like cool phrenology papers that we wanted to tell people about. And then the other place you can look is the newsletter archive, particularly the partner newsletter. It's called The Connection. That one will have like all the past newsletters, and we do post like other information about other papers
wonderful.
in there too. Yeah. All right. So if there aren't any more questions, I think we will say goodbye for this week. But thank you so much for coming and all the great questions.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.